Our fundraiser of the week is for Haneen and Bassam. Haneen has sent the following special message to Games for Gaza on hearing that we are raising funds for her. She says, "Oh my God, how happy that made me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really needed that. I love you very, very, very because you stand by my side." And then she sends many red hearts and hug emojis. She also says, "I need to travel as soon as possible when the war ends so that I can travel before the war returns again. I want to live a decent life, achieve my dreams for me and my husband, so I really hope that you will help me." And then a downcast emoji face and a red heart emoji. The link to Haneen's fundraiser will be in the video description. If you would like to donate and then enter our giveaway, please take a screenshot to upload so that we can track how many donations are coming through. No donation is required to enter the giveaway, and the link for the giveaway is also in our video description. Now, on to today's interview. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to, for me, this is our first pre-recorded Games for Gaza event. So welcome to that. I am your host, Esther. Most of you probably know me, but who knows? Some people may be finding this video or audio recording and they may not. So I'm Esther Wallace. I use the pronouns she and she, and I do a lot in the tabletop game space. I am a sometimes game designer. I make actual play. I co-host a Pathfinder news, reviews, and interviews show called No Direction with the wonderful Navar Seek Jackson. And I am also producing this series of events, this unfolding, series of events called Games for Gaza that is really to support a free Palestine, to support Palestinians who are enduring the genocide in Gaza and in all of occupied Palestine. And so today I am really, really happy to welcome ArcaneWhiskers to this series of events. Yesterday, you produced this wonderful one-shot actual play of, I believe, your game, Quasar. So much fun to listen to. So yeah, I'm just going to ask you, tell us who you are and what you do, and we'll hear about you first, and then we'll get into our very, very juicy discussion for the day.
Thank you so much for the space and for the opportunity, and of course for the whole fundraiser. I'm Omar, otherwise known as ArcaneWhiskers. I'm a Palestinian living in Jordan, and I'm born and raised here actually. But yeah, I'm a tabletop game designer. I'm the solo dev of Quasar Tales from Endless Void, which is a kind of a fusion between a ttrpg and a war game, kind of like the combat mechanics of a war game. But I also make a lot of little other side games here and there, and I design 3D printable terrain and minis. Mostly because my background is actually as a mechanical engineer, so CAD design is where I'm actually coming from, you know. But yeah, I kind of got into this space, and I absolutely love TTRPGs, so it's nice to be here.
Amazing. So I have a couple directions I'd love to go first. The very first one is one of my partners is also Jordanian, and we're going to have a conversation for this series too. She's not Palestinian, but she has close Palestinian kindred, and I was like, I bet a lot of people sadly don't know where Jordan is. Can we start by talking about where geographically is Jordan?
Absolutely. So it's quite literally right next to Palestine. Like we can see Palestine basically if we you know go up north, up in in the mountains, you can literally see it right across. Or if you're at the Dead Sea, you can see it right across. And it's extremely close. And as a result, just the base cultural division of being okay, that's Jordanian and that's Palestinian is a more recent thing to begin with. In the past, it was more divided by, okay, you're from this village or you're Bedouin or so and so, and that's kind of that was more significant. So extremely close by, and of course, after the Nakba, a huge amount of Palestinians came here, including my grandparents. And so a big chunk of our population is either Palestinian or a mix of Palestinian Jordanian or Palestinian Jordanian Syrian. In my case, Palestinian Syrian. So yeah. So yeah, li right next to it. Legitimately right next to it. And that even extends to the food and the music and everything. It's all very, very close. Really, really, really similar.
Awesome. I'm wondering, can you tell us before the Nakba, where did your parents live or your grandparents live in Palestine?
I know my grandfather on my father's side was from Nablus. In fact, my last name's Abdel Hadi, and Abdel Hadis are like we still have this like big palace in Nablus named after us that we can't visit because, you know. As for my grandfather on my mother's side, I believe he was from Jenin. I'm not super sure, mainly because he fled to South America right after the Nakba. And so most of my growing up was mostly seeing, you know, his Spanish side and knowing more about that and the stories he told us growing up there because he kind of fled at a younger age than my father's dad, who in his case kept resisting until he moved over and everything. You know, it's like the whole connection there. We've grown up with that. We've always grown up with that culture there. Like I say, I'm half Palestinian, half Syrian because both of my grandmothers are Syrian. But I usually say as myself as Palestinian just straight up because culture isn't about what's in your blood, it's about what you're raised with. And most of the Syrian side is just the food, you know, really good food, mind you, but culturally it's always been very, very much Palestinian, you know, the songs, the stories, you know, you're told from a really young age about it and everything that's there and everything that ties you there. And you get it, you know, you just get it. You get it from like just when someone brings over like a tub of olive oil from the West Bank and you know you have some for breakfast or that and you're like, yeah, I feel that, you know, you completely get that tie to the land, you know?
Yeah. One of the things we had talked about discussing in this particular panel is the experience of growing up Palestinian in diaspora, just one border away, like so close. And
Yeah.
I feel like we're talking about some of that now. One of the curiosities that I had is like, what is the possibility to even visit like the West Bank for people who are refugees or came as refugees to what is now Jordan and are there? And I know that the ability to visit or go home is very complicated to say the least. The first Palestinian person that I ever knew who was Palestinian,
Mhm.
like one of our first conversations was him telling me like I can't go home. And
Yeah.
that has impacted me to this day hearing those words. So I'm curious like yeah, can we get into the experience of growing up so close and yet having all those barriers there?
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard. Like I've never been personally, and that's mostly because growing up even until now, like my parents were like, no, no way. No way. They're like, it's way too dangerous. You know, you don't know what the guards, what the IOF, you know, guards are gonna do to you at the border. What if they decide suddenly they don't like you and, you know, they hurt you for fun or something? What if your name for some reason matches someone that's on a watch list or something, and now you're detained, and who knows how anyone's gonna get you out? So it's this very strange feeling of it being so, so, so close and yet just, you know, not reachable. For some people, particularly those that live here but do not have Jordanian citizenship and are just Palestinian, they often do go back and forth quite a lot, but it's not easy at all. And even then, you know, they're going into occupied territory. So it's always a risk. It's always an absolute risk. I don't know. It's really strange, honestly. It's a very strange emotion, particularly because there's a difference in the landscape as well. Jordan leans more towards the desert side of things, and a lot of parts of Palestine are a lot more green. And it's kind of a very literal the grass is greener on the other side, you know. But yeah, I mean, there's that, and then there's the family history bit of being like I mentioned earlier, like Abdul Hadis were um fairly prominent in Nablus for quite some time. So, you know, we've got like a UNESCO World Heritage Site that's literally named after us there, and like I can't go see it, so that's not great. But yeah,
That is, pardon my language, everyone, fucking wild. And
it's fucking wild.
I often think like if most Americans endured like 1/100th of what most Palestinians have had to endure just in their family lineage, in their histories, people would burn shit down here. Like they would simply not know how to deal. When I think about like so many people I've known, like that story is just like so far from their experience. And to hear about it, it's just fucking wild. And you're like, how can any human being treat another group of human beings in this fashion? Not that very similar things haven't happened where I live and are still unfolding where I live, but I think the degree to which there's dehumanization and so much denial of return and of history that goes on with Palestine is just truly bowls me over every time I really hear about it and think about it. And that's the response I have is just like, wow, fuck that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm so sorry you can't go see that, you know?
It's terrible, but it's far from unique, unfortunately. Like it is the story of practically every colonial project, every project that removes Native people from their lands. And we forget that a lot of these are very recent, like
Yeah.
incredibly recent. Like in Australia, just the other day, I was talking to someone who was like, yeah, they were talking about this movie, something called, I believe, The Rabbit Fence. I don't remember what it was
Mm.
called, but this guy was saying, like, yeah, my grandfather and six of his siblings were taken in one of those camps, the re-education camps. They would take kids in and just, some wouldn't make it out. And it's like this person's grandfather, like that is not long ago at all. That's not long
Yeah.
ago at all. And like I can say the same for my grandparents. I know my one of my closest friends was telling me that her grandfather during the Nakba made it out just barely when they basically lined up all of the men in his village. And he decided instead of lining up with them to sneak away and run out. Yeah, it was sneaking and running out. But what he found out later was that everyone in that village, all the men that they lined up, were just killed one by one, just in a row. So like if he had stayed and listened to their orders just a tiny bit, just a little bit later, he wouldn't have made it. And it's like, this was just, 2 generations ago. That's not long ago at all. And the only thing that makes this different, you could say, is the fact that in its ongoing nature, it hasn't been won yet by the IOF.
Yeah.
That's the difference. That's the struggle is still active. It is not one that is put aside. And of course, as we know, resistance fighters are often branded as terrorists, and that framing is extremely effective. It is very, very useful in just saying, okay, yeah, forget about that. And a great example, honestly, is this, right? Like if I'm wearing it like this, right? Suddenly it's oh, I'm the spooky, stereotypical guy, but that this is a versatile tool, incredibly versatile. You can wear as, as a hat, as a scarf. You can close off around, if it's sandy weather or it's raining or it's heavy. It's incredible. That's not the only reason it's been used to hide identities because people have been forced to do so to survive. And yeah, I mean it's difficult. I think I kind of went off track, but
No,
yeah.
this was it took me to like people sort of revering this myth of like the peaceful resistance. And
Hmm,
nonviolent resistance can be wonderful. It can achieve great things. And we know that so much colonialism is ultimately resisted through violence or
right.
through having to rise up and use the tools at your disposal to stop oppressors doing what they're doing. And I think when we talk about freedom fighters and being branded as terrorists, that's exactly what's going on there, is this unwillingness by many to understand the necessity of, what these folks are really driven to. It takes me back to what I was saying about, I think of a lot of people, particularly white people here that I know, and the things that will set them off to anger. And I'm like, if you have been through a fraction of what they have been through, I guarantee you, you would be doing the same thing. Like
100%.
100%.
100%.
Like,
And
yeah.
yeah, and it's just, I mean, that's something I've kind of put into Quasar as well. Like
Mm.
Quasar is not a cozy TTRPG system. It's very much a system where it's focused on the combat, on the
Yeah.
fighting. And I definitely am a person that prefers, solving problems non-violently through diplomacy, through speech, through discussion, through finding middle grounds. But that often requires, the other person to have a conscience to have that. And historically, the way we've seen it is that unfortunately these things are abused, terribly abused. So that's something that's in there, in Quasar, that the heroes often, regardless of what situation their GM has put them in, they often have to take matters in their own hands and fight to make a change and actually, make a difference. I think people often mistake that for like, oh, this is about hate. But it's not about that at all. If you're being stamped down by somebody, you're not really like you can't expect a person to just sit there and take it. They have to stand up. It's a matter of basic dignity, at the end of the day. And yeah, I think it's just a very nefarious idea that like, oh yeah, if resistance is not peaceful, it is not legitimate. There's always a better way. There is not always a better way. I wish there was, sincerely. But yeah.
That actually takes me to a question about like gaming. And one of the things we had discussed talking about was like tabletop games as a form of resistance or as what you do living in these circumstances. And I know there has been discourse, certainly among a more like US centric audience, about the role of violence in tabletop games.
Hmm.
And I'm so curious about this kind of perspective of freedom fighting and
Yeah.
violence as a reflection of freedom fighting, because sometimes I think, and there's a place for this too, there's this kind of pushback against it that like, well, we've gotten too focused on violence as the only mechanism in like wargaming or in classic D&D or Pathfinder.
Right.
And I think there's a place for that discussion, but I'm really, really interested in talking about like what you were just articulating in terms of there's sometimes it is the resort, the thing you have to do.
Absolutely. I think a really good example we've got in Quasar. And so Quasar is still in progress, but as far as it is so far, I've written out in the core rule book some basics of the lore to give GMs a tool to build upon the world. But as far as it's written, as far as the lore that's available to them, there are several settings that one could be playing in where it is not realistic to sit there and try diplomacy to break out. One very key one that might be kind of very a bit too real for most of us these days is the Soul Corporation, which is this evil megacorp that owns all of humanity. And the Soul Corporation has no sense of morality at all. It exists purely for profit at the expense of everyone before it. So you've got these mega cities on planets, in some cases like Earth or what's left of what's habitable of Earth, where living there is genuinely awful. You are not even technically a citizen in any sense. You just own a house within a location, and there's no mechanism of protection. Protection only exists for corporate assets, and that's it. So, a corporate employee could come over, shoot you, and keep walking, and no one would bat an eye. And so within that world in most of these cities, what ends up protecting these people are vigilantes, private individuals that on their own decide they want to protect their communities and fight for them and defend them. Because how are you going to sway a mega corporation that owns everything? If it's through protests, why would they listen to your protests? Why would they not just, send their droids out and and mow everyone down or something? So in the case of Quasar, that's very much a theme in the more oppressive sides of it. And in the freer sides of it, places like the Galactic Federation or the Volpathian Empire, which is, yes, I know it's an empire, but it's an inversion of tropes, but yeah. The freer side of things, the people that are there are understand that they need to fight to protect others, that they have to go in and fight off these threats where diplomacy does not work to keep innocent people safe, people that would otherwise be harmed by your complacency, by, you know, sitting on your laurels and just pretending like nothing's happening. And often for players, the way Quasar is built, they design their characters to be heroes. Unlike, say, in D&D, when you start at level one and you're just this, fellow with a bow that's not going to handle a mimic that just jumps out at them. In Quasar, you're very much the John Wick of your own story, right? You're dodging bullets, you're grabbing someone in the middle of your turn, or you're doing all that. And that was mostly a way of putting in that space opera feel of the swashbuckling hero into the player's hands in a setting where they can feel like they can have some proper agency for change, for better change, not for the worse. And strangely enough, I've found that when you give players that, I've had like the least amount of murder hobo players while doing Quasar, mainly because they feel like, yeah, it feels good when they take out a band of, evil corporate mercenaries and they come back to the town and everyone's like, you're literally our only hope. You've saved us, you know? I guess kind of how it's been strung together, where that violence is uh, a tool for good, not one for the sake of violence by any
Right,
means. But yeah.
right. And I think, like, for those of us living in the imperial core and, being passive tools of violence kind of through
Mm.
paying taxes, even if we don't want to be, there's a different imagination around how it can be used and what it can be used for than, say, like, this is the thing standing between me and being literally wiped out. And this is a tool, as you said, that can be used for liberation, for good. And I thank you for really getting me to think more about that perspective right now, and especially how tabletop can be a tool to imagine the world we want to live in. I'd be so curious to get into that a little bit more. Like, how did you get into tabletop? We can start there and then we can maybe get to the imaginary and like
Sure.
how yeah, how did you get into tabletop?
So I started off just playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we started off really rough. It was somewhere like I think in my second year of university, and my sister watched Stranger Things, and don't support Stranger Things, boycott. But yeah, um, and she was like, "I want to try this," and I'd start looking it up and looking into it, and I'm like, "Okay, I have no idea where to start." And I gathered some friends, and regardless of her pitching it, she didn't join in for some reason. But yeah, and we played basically what was a really pretend version of D&D, where we kind of just went with things and would roll. And one player had like what I thought was a rule book at the time. And like I would consult him, and he was telling me things that turned out to be completely fake. He was basically making things up as we went along. But we had a lot of fun. So I took that and I ended up running a couple of like long form one shots for my friends based on World of Warcraft. And that was a lot of fun, and that got me into just fully DMing. So I DM'd for about like 7 years after that. Parties changed, players came and went, but at some point our party was starting to break apart after COVID because, the internet thing, and then we had people just going different directions in life, going to do their masters, getting married, all that sort of stuff. So what we were doing was our main party, our main group was supposed to be continuous. It wouldn't break apart. Like, because I need everyone to be there for that plot. So whenever someone would be missing, we'd do a little side game with a sci-fi setting, and I would test out new mechanics there. The main reason was I was really bored of D&D's combat, and I wanted to see what I could do with that. So that was kind of the start of Quasar's setting. And for the mechanics, what really clicked, what really hit home was I had gotten into Games Workshop Kill Team 2, like the second version, not the current version it's at, when it first came out. And I was like, I love the way this feels, the way that the shooting is snappy, the combat's snappy. What if I fused it with D&D? And I sat there and like homebrewed each player's character sheet into this kill team stat block, and I set up this board for them. Like, all right, go on, fight. I had a lot of problems, like a lot of problems, but it was nice and it kind of worked. So from that point on, I was working very loosely on Quasar. What got me to really start taking it seriously was that at the time I was working for this large telecom company, but I was running a fabrication lab for them initially, and then started running this innovation hub, and just the corporate world made me hate myself completely. And I wanted to leave and do something on my own, some real creative work. So I took a look at Quasar and I was like, it's supposed to be a small little side project, but you know what? I think it's got way more potential than that. And I decided to do that full time. I just left the corporate worlds and currently, doing the whole starving artist thing of just making Quasar and making minis and terrain and all that and just putting it out there. And I found that in that game, there was a lot more that I could do, particularly for the people around me, for building communities and the like. The friends that I ended up having join Quasar and start playing, they became some of the closest friends I have, over that time. And when things happened, like say when genocide in Gaza began, it was a really good outlet for us. It was a really good escape where, maybe it wasn't as heavy in other places as it was here because here, wherever you went, it it was a constant reminder. You'd go down to the local supermarket and the shopkeeper would have the news on and he's just watching the genocide and he's got his hand on his mouth and you hear it and you feel it. You feel it all in you. So it gave us a really, really good escape from all that and a really good space to breathe, space to feel like heroes ourselves, and space to, in some cases get kind of a sense of catharsis and justice. It's like if you can't get justice against oppressors in real life, at the very least you can in a game. At the very least you can, stick it to that corporate guy that's deciding to evict you from your house and tear things apart and so on and so forth. But yeah, we're here now. We're on like two Quasar games a week. One of my friends now a GM as well, so we've got that going. And still going. I'm working on the next update at the moment, actually.
Wow, we could go so many directions. One thing that's occurred to me is what is the gaming scene like? Before we go some other places that took me, what is the gaming scene like where you are? And like, yeah, how many people play D&D or Quasar or whatever game?
Right. So it's fairly fresh and new here. For D&D, we kind of, for the longest time, thought that me and my friends were like the only people that were playing it because we didn't have any board game shop, like proper board game shops, other than the little like cafes that where you'd play some board games. Though over time, especially after that group disintegrated, we discovered actually by raw chance while testing like an earliest, really early version of Quasar, another big D&D group that was here. That was nice. We'd go to this cafe and we play every week, and it's still going, but a lot less strongly right now. Of course, with a few pockets here and there of people that play, though the numbers are not high by any means. Things have been helped out a bit because recently we've had a couple of local game shops open up that are quite nice, pretty, cute places. For Quasar, we've got maybe around on and off like 10 local players. We've got a good bit of players from abroad as well, for on a Discord at, we run skirmishes at times. And though that D&D group, I no longer play with them and they've kind of, they've diminished a lot in size. We've still got the local Quasar groups. And every now and then, I'll meet someone and be like, I'm gonna run you a skirmish. Let's do it, And I'll just drag them over to his local game store and they'll play that. But the tabletop scene is still new. And it's only recently that it's gone a lot easier to get dice in and stuff, and they know what you need. The players' handbooks and stuff like that are still prohibitively very expensive comparatively to like average wages here, which is a big reason why Quasar is free because you know, when we started playing D&D, we basically just went with whatever rules we could find online and went from there. Because no way to pay that much for a book to play. It's also why the minis are optional, even though they're the way I make money off the game. You can just get any minis you want, put them down and play with that. But yeah, they're it's growing, steadily growing. Small communities here, but they are steadily growing, including in the wargaming scene too. Actually, we recently got a small Warcraft community, so that was very
Oh,
cute. Yeah, yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess that takes me to like we've talked a little bit about tabletop being an escape in times of genocide.
Mm.
Um, and I'm curious, like, how do you think tabletop can help us imagine a world that's very radically different than the one we live in now?
Right. I think well. And this might sound a bit dramatic, but I kind of think tabletop games, but specifically tabletop role-playing games, are this very incredible kind of magic. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, it's magical, like that. No, in a sense from like in the proper, often like accepted occult sense of magic and the idea that you are fully immersing yourself in this altered state of being and accepting what you see as real and you just dive into it. You dive into that other self. And I think that it's an incredibly powerful tool, not only for building communities and bringing people together, but for telling stories in a way that's deeply engaging and puts you together. And we often forget that one of the oldest things humans have ever done is tell stories. Before writing, way before writing, longer than we've ever had writing, we passed down our culture through oral traditions. And this is no exception. When your players, go back home, they're thinking about the game, and then, a few weeks later, they meet someone that's not playing, and they just start gushing about the game and they're talking about the stories they've been through. That's no different. They're talking about the adventures that they've soaked into them. So, with that in mind, that the power behind that, the ability you can put into that, it's a really, really good tool for experimenting with these thoughts, with these ideas. All right, folks, what if your characters were from an evil background, for example? Well, evil, relatively evil background. So a great, you could say, plot hook for that is in Quasar, one of the factions, the Order of the Black Diamond, is this very fanatical, zealously monotheistic cult of sorts. And they worship this god AI that is, very oppressive and very much, you know, ever present for them. And when players play one of these classes, they have to contend with everything that comes with that. And the people that are around them that might look at them and be like, yeah, no, you're not welcome here. Of course you're not welcome here. Your people are actively genocidal. We're not gonna let you let you in here. And they have to, stop and reckon and be like, no, no, I'm not like that. I'm not like that. I follow the Black Diamond, but I'm not following, the church and all the things that are there. I'm following what I've got there. And it puts them in this whole scenario that they might have never pictured and never seen. Or let's say they're a corporate bounty hunter that suddenly gets a job that conflicts with their morals. And now, they have to go after some, innocent family that somehow got on, some corpo's bad side. And it's not the same as someone watching a piece of media or like listening to a piece of media, because to an extent, whether we like it or not, we put ourselves in these characters when we make them. And it's something I've seen very often that whenever someone makes a character, there's a part of them in it. Even if it's like very different, it's a whole different person. There's always that thread, that piece of their personality that's in there. And that is not something you can just sever when you're playing the character, which is likely why it usually hurts a lot when your character dies, and you really feel for that. But yeah, it's
Yeah, I think there's a piece in there that like around we put ourselves into our characters, whether we mean to or not. Like there is that personal thread, that attachment. And I think it really means something to be like embodying the character, to have your body in this scenario. Because as much as I love a lot of characters in media or in actual play that I listen to, it's not the same as when I'm playing that person myself, when I feel that rush in my body, when I feel the tension of whatever is going on in whatever scenario we're in. Like that really is a kind of magic. And I agree with you, not that like it's a magical, a beautiful, like no, it's a very potent like alchemy. Like there's
Yeah,
something really going on there. And it's what part of what draws me to tabletop is the marriage of like telling these stories that are so powerful, and then the personal element of it, the getting to really be in it, and how transformative that can be. Like if we're confronted with something and it's like, oh, I've never thought about that in that way before, or I've never had to experience that in the life I live, but this character is, and now a part of me is experiencing that too. What a powerful thing. Like,
definitely.
wow.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of space to explore that I think needs to be explored right now. We've got to move away from these like silly, old, and honestly vaguely racist ideas in like tabletop games of like, oh, okay, orcs are bad. Let's just go with these evil orcs and so on and so forth. Because not only is that incredibly shallow and in many cases, like I said, like vaguely or intentionally racist, it's frankly bad writing.
Yeah.
You could do so much more by like saying, okay, this orcish culture, like this one particular orcish culture, this tribe of orcs, raids to survive, right? Like it's their way of life. They're a nomadic horde that moves along, and they have to raid this kingdom to survive. And the kingdom sees them as pure evil, right? They'll kill their babies and they'll take whatever and all that. But then, like, if the players would go to the orcs and be there, it's like, oh yeah, but they've got their perspective too. They've got nothing where they are, and they need to raid to live. And then you have to, work with that and untangle it. And if you're making a character that's an orc from that tribe that's coming into the city, you're gonna have to contend with that, sudden shock and that change in perspective that's going on there. So there's a lot to explore there. And while I completely commend a lot of TTRPG players that make games that focus on diplomacy and nonviolence, and obviously that's got its place. There's a lot of games, and each game's got its theme and its own style. We also can't forget about making games that do employ aggression and problem solving through aggression, but in a way where it's nuanced and it's not just, okay, I'm just gonna hit everyone in the town and keep going.
I'm
You
just gonna
know,
kill everyone because it doesn't
I'm
matter. Yeah.
right. Like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Where are the consequences? Right.
Yeah. And games that I think reckon with what it is to take life, even if that life has been oppressing others, there's still consequences. And there's still that, I
Absolutely.
think, that dimension of, oh my God, I had to kill someone. When I've played characters that killed someone that was causing harm, like absolutely had to do it, there's still that moment for me in character of, I just did a really big thing.
Yeah.
And like that weight of taking a breath with it. I think that's all so important. And yeah, yeah, I'm excited for this conversation we're having. I hope it starts more conversations in the space.
I really hope so too. That would be, I think, very, very, very helpful. Because Quasar, like again, like I said, it's very space opera. And you're kind of supposed to be, Han Solo, Chewie, Leia, and Luke fighting a bunch of stormtroopers, right? That's the game feel of the combat. But it's just every now and then when, a stormtrooper's helmet comes off, and you're like, oh my God, that's a person.
That's a person.
Right? Like that is a person. That is a person that probably joined because they had no other way to make money, no other way to live. And you have to contend with that. And you have to process that and eventually come to terms with the idea that's like, yeah, but in this scenario, you know, it was me or them. It was innocent people or them. And so that I think something needs to be explored a lot more
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think in the world we're living in, particularly, many places that have not had to contend with that as much are going to have to contend with it even more. And many people who have not had to contend with it are going to find themselves having to do so. And the more we can begin the process of understanding what it is to take a life, but
Mm.
also what it is to have to defend life, what it is to have to really grapple with decolonizing and what that means. I think the sooner we begin to learn about that in all the ways we can, the better. And I'm very, very curious about tabletop and games like Quasar as tools for getting people to really think and grapple with and learn about those things. Yeah.
Big time, big time. I think like kind of brought back to a quote by the late Dr. Rifat Al-Hariri, Allah yarhamu, or God rest his soul. He was an academic, and he said that the most dangerous thing he owns is I think it was like a big pen.
Hmm.
And he was like, and you know what? If the IOF would come after me and my family, I would use that pen. And unfortunately, he lost his life in a bombing by the IOF. But yeah, like it's really easy to talk that, guys, let's just take a step back and it's you don't have to do that. It's not justified or so on and so forth from a comfortable position.
Yeah.
I'm in a comfortable position, I'm very thankful for that comfortable position, but I don't know for how much longer a lot of people will be in these comfortable positions, given the way the world is going and the way things are moving. And I'm reminded also by an individual named Greg Stoker, who talks about as a podcast called Colonial Outcasts, and he talks about how a huge amount of these tools being used in Gaza it's literally a test bed for weapons. And those weapons inevitably get turned on protesters in the US, for example. They get turned on First Nations people that might be trying to, resist even more oppression than what they've already had to contend with. And that should terrify everyone because the idea of it's not my problem, the correct thing is it's not your problem yet. You don't know if it's going to be your problem, you know? And it's better to stop it before it becomes your problem, before it becomes anyone else's problem too. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's
And often I think maybe it is already your problem. You just don't
yeah,
know it. Like
yeah,
my hometown, the police force there trains with the IOF. I think they
yeah,
train each other.
absolutely.
I'm from Atlanta. We built Cop City, and the devastation that's going to cause for Black communities, for communities of color in Atlanta, and then eventually, for white people too. Just because it takes longer to get to a certain group of people doesn't mean it's not already there and it's not coming for us. And if you can't care just because this is happening to another human being, which I think is ought to be enough for us all to care. But
Yeah,
if you can't care because of that, care because this is going to affect you sooner or later.
absolutely.
As we were talking about, colonialism earlier, I was thinking about the place I live now is
Mm,
home to a lot of indigenous communities who have been here thousands of generations. Such a beautiful thing to me to have had your family be in a place and be of that land for so long. Of course, in the mid 1800s, there were colonizers who came here, one in particular, and I don't want to give away the name of the town where I am exactly, but
mm,
the town where I am is named after this guy who came in, committed a horrible genocide. It's an awful, awful, terrible story. The
mm,
town where I live, named after him. So there's been an effort to rename this town, both from indigenous folks and from allies who are like horrified that this name is still a thing. The amount of pushback from our community has been wild to me as
mm.
someone who's like, I don't want to live in a town named after that guy. Like
Absolutely.
this
Why would you
place,
celebrate
why would you
that? Like,
celebrate that? Like and
yeah.
this place had names before. Why don't we
Mm,
why don't we learn those names? It's this is a temporary thing that should never have happened in the first place. It's been amazing to me the amount of people who are upset by something as small as a name change. We're not even talking about land back. We're not talking about
yeah.
taxes. It's a name change. And the number of people who just, you would have thought it was the worst thing to ever happen to them in their lives. They said it was. At public meetings, we had a non-binding advisory vote on this, where I think it was about 70% of people want to keep this name. Our county commission voted to advise the Board of Geographic Names in the United States that can change names of cities that aren't like officially incorporated, which this is, advise them to change it anyway. And it's not lost on me that there were two Indigenous people on that commission who voted for this. It was a 3-2 vote. And to me, that says like the struggles here are not different from the struggles of
So,
people in occupied Palestine, these places being renamed, people acting like it's the end of the world to change a
right.
name back. You know, I'm learning people have made direct threats against the families of
Hmm.
the Indigenous folks in leadership in our county, telling them absolutely horrible things I won't repeat here. But to me, that says like if we think colonization isn't alive where we are, a lot of us, that's just misinformation. We're just believing
Absolutely.
a lie. So to me, it's all very interconnected. Is what I'm trying to
I
get at. I said a lot to say that.
no,
It's
no,
all
you
interconnected.
you completely right, honestly. Like it's deeply, deeply interconnected. And I think that, and when we say these things, we have to be careful not to get into blood and soil arguments and such, because that's when you roll into the opposite side of that. But like when your family has lived on a certain land for long enough, there are things that really tie you on there. In the case of Palestine, it's usually it was the olive trees. Well, other than the ancient architecture and all that, families with generations upon generations that lived there. These olive trees, to grow them takes lifetimes, just to have them grow and be proper fruiting trees. And it's extremely telling, when Israeli settlers will come in and they'll just remove them. They'll just chop them down. And you watch these videos of farmers just crying their eyes out over these trees, because it's not just a tree, it's their legacy, it's their whole family's legacy. And it's really hard. It's very hard to get someone to understand that. When a native people tells you that this mountain is sacred, they don't mean this mountain is sacred. It's just like, oh, it's just beautiful. It's just that it is genuinely sacred to them. Like with Laniakea and the space telescopes, in Hawaii. Like that is, you know, like you really want to build stupid telescope on a sacred mountain because you want slightly better visuals. Like, do you not realize how awful that is? How like self-centered all that is? But yeah, it's really. I do think mini TTRPGs could be a great way to help bring that in. All media is really useful for this. It's very, very helpful for all of this. But there's a problem, I think, in media where it's often afraid to really dive too far into it. It's afraid to really, really hit where it is. And I'm kind of reminded of like Arcane recently, which is name unrelated, but it's a great show, but name unrelated, where I really was like reminded of the West Bank with like no spoilers for anyone that hasn't watched, but in the second season, with the checkpoints and stuff that were set up and the events going back and forth. But also it was very much it's a two sides situation, like, oh yeah, there's points here, there's points there. It wasn't blatantly and very full on occupier versus occupied, which I think we could do a lot more of. We could do a lot more of, because this kind of media literacy seeps into our culture and our understanding. I brought up Star Wars earlier for Quasar's sake, and I think Star Wars was excellent in having us realize, like, oh yeah, that's an evil empire. You know, like that is an evil empire, and that is bad. That is a bad thing. And it helps people recognize that now, just naturally recognize that when they see it. And we could use a lot more of that direct impact. And if folks making popular shows are too worried about doing that, or too worried about blatantly doing it at the moment, it's our job to do it as GMs, as storytellers, Be a local storyteller. Your community is more important than, a whole huge global network or something. Start with the people around you, the people you care about. You can do a lot there. So, yeah,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is such a needed message. Start where you are, do what you can where you are, and you can make a lot of impact there. I wanted to ask real quick before I turn us to kind of my like closing questions. Are you a Star Trek person by any chance?
somehow no.
Okay.
I don't know how it never happened, but yeah.
I'm a Star Trek fan of several of the shows. I used to I had watched every show and then there was a bunch of new ones and now I'm behind and I haven't seen a lot of them. My favorite show is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, probably my favorite television show ever, and it's very much about colonization and the legacies of colonization. And I've heard, I would want to verify, but I have heard that they based a lot of the planetary colonization story that is unfolding around Palestine and the occupying Israeli forces. There's the Cardassians who are the occupiers and the Bajorans who have had their planet occupied for like 70 years, 100 years, something like that. And throughout all the seasons of this show, you watch the legacy of colonization unfold. You watch how like a people who achieved their liberation, like it starts right after the Bajorans have achieved their liberation, and you watch like what they go through in the aftermath of that, the ways that colonization keeps impacting the planet, the ways they have to deal with their neighbors who were the colonizers. You see like
Absolutely.
these brutal versions of the Cardassians, but you also meet Cardassians who are like people,
Of course.
living their lives. It's I think one of the best looks at that I have ever experienced. So I just wanted to plug DS9 for anybody who
I've got to
hasn't seen
watch
it.
that now, I
Yeah,
think. But
yeah.
I do think I remember a single scene I've seen on YouTube, one with Data talking about like how, armed resistance has always been useful. And then Picard goes like, but that's like the way, things were, and there's always a better option. But something I do love about that is talking about the aftermath, about what comes next. And I think something we've kind of forgotten how to do in our current day and age is that we forget to think that some fights aren't for us, they're for future generations. And in the case of Palestine, if tomorrow the occupation would end and suddenly there'd be a one-state solution where, you know, all right, this is a secular state where everyone has equal human rights. It would not be pretty right away. It'd be very difficult, but it's a necessary step, and we have to expect that this is something for the future, for later, for as time moves on, as wounds heal, as things become more okay to work with that. But that notion of like what wouldn't work. It wouldn't work right now. And like I've heard it personally, like from other Palestinians. I remember once on a hike, I was chatting, we're like talking. It's like, well, we're like pro two state or one state solution. And this one lady was like, I can't imagine myself being a neighbor with an Israeli. She's like, how can I do that? They want to kill me. That's awful. And the idea is like, yeah, well, we got to think of what's to come. We have to think of how that ends up, and that's really, really important. It's really important to do, not just for colonization, for climate change, for change in general. That we have to stop thinking about ourselves and start thinking about the untold billions and trillions of people to come that are going to be in the mess we've left them, right? But yeah, I definitely have to watch Star Trek now. That's
DS9 specifically. It's really good. I warn you, it's a little campy in the first season especially, but it gets oh, it's so good. It's so good, especially if you stick with it. Highly recommend DS9. What you said, just thinking about the future and future generations, took me back to the olive trees and how planting an olive tree is such an act of love for future generations and an act of love for the land for future generations. And so I'm curious as maybe we start to wrap up. You're just one person, but what are some of your hopes for a free Palestine? What would that
M-
mean to you?
My hope is that somehow with the especially right now with the increased global consciousness, greater global recognition about what's going on, that this, things happen the same way with South Africa. There are, heavy boycotts, actual action to put a stop to the apartheid, a stop to the whole bit. And we end up with a one-state solution, one that's democratic, secular, that does not care about who's who, but also allows for people to come back, those that have been forced out. It has to give a degree of justice to those that have been harmed. Without justice, you cannot expect long-term peace. And through that, I hope that, you know, this just becomes something that we accept as a really dark time in history, a really terrible time that passes and we end up with something much better afterwards. I'm, despite all that's happened, I'm actually very thankful that people have really woken up to a lot of it because it used to be where if I were to talk about Palestine to people, anyone abroad, honestly, I would get, the class like, all right, let's not talk about it. Let's just put that away. We don't want to do that. Or I would get as something genuinely terrible in response. Ideas of basically being directly called, or like, yeah, you're a terrorist, right? Or a terrorist sympathizer, stuff like that. But now it's really changed. Now, even when you go down to memes that are everywhere, you're like, oh yeah, I know this. Uh, these are like memes making fun of like how terrible the IOF is, for example. And that's like, yeah, no one would have said that like just 5 years ago. You couldn't have said that. Hell, 5 years ago, I got into an awful argument on a Discord server because some guy was posting human shield memes, and I was like, how could you like? And this was like during a different time when Gaza was being hit, and I was like, how could you? And then like the mods, they were like, no, you can't talk about this, you can't do that. It's like, okay, that's awful. I got in a fight with them, of course, and left. But yeah, like it's the change in the public consciousness is a very big step forward. It is huge. And I don't think the boycotts are as big over where you're at as they are here, because over here it's so ubiquitous that even when you go to restaurants, you can't find a Pepsi anymore. Like that's not a thing anymore there. Like you can still get them in some supermarkets if you're looking for them. But like we've got these like local placements called Matrix that just like basically taste the same. It's close enough. At least it's not blood money. But like that is a very large impact in terms of, economic impact. And for the first time in history, we've had a colonizing power being sent to the ICC and being inspected by the ICJ and, you know, genuine repercussions that are building up. So I'm very hopeful that all that eventually becomes too much to ignore. It's too much to just sit by and be like, yeah, but like technically it's not genocide. And it's like, by what goddamn metric? Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
But who decides that metric? And like who made up what the technical definition is?
It's insane. It's an insane
Yeah.
idea because like even by most standards that people put of like, okay, it's got to be efficient or it's got to be by numbers, which are not the officially recognized descriptions. Even by then, you have situations that are done, for example, by the British in places like India, or by Germany in Africa, for example, or a large list of European nations in Africa, actually, that more than qualify for that, but are not acknowledged as such, you know? And I find that awfully convenient. It's awfully convenient for not, doing reparations, for not acknowledging the crimes that are still ongoing, that they're still complicit in. Yeah,
I I had one more question. But first, is there anything we didn't get to that you really wanted to talk about?
no, I don't think so, actually. I'm not sure. I think I talked a lot, so it's
That was the whole point. The whole point is
okay.
that we would talk. So that was great. What can the tabletop game space do to support a free Palestine and to support Palestinians, both within the space and Palestinians outside of the space? What can we do as designers, as people in actual play, as players, as hobbyists, all of the above?
So there's a good few things that one can do. First of all, and I'm saying this from a totally unbiased position, support Palestinian creators. Actually support them. We can like we know on itch.io when you download our games or not. There's a statistic, you know. So sharing it is awesome, and I love that. I really appreciate it. But just pretending like you took a look and then you don't download it or you don't even want to give it a try, it doesn't do anything. The most you can do is to play it and play it with people, right? It's free for a reason. It's there for you to get into it. Um, but also in spaces like this where there's a space to talk, to bring on voices, bring on Palestinians into your shows to bring that perspective, their own views. Even in this case of storytelling, we've got our a lot of mythology and a lot of elements to offer in that and put in there. And it really does add a whole other dimension to things that one may not realize. Earlier on, I talked about how versatile kufiya is, for example. And one item you can get in Quasar is a nanofiber kufiya, which has that versatile element that you can change the way you're wearing it to change the stat bonuses that it gives you, for example. So yeah, support Palestinian artists and creators directly if you can. If you cannot, share their work for sure and give it a proper shot. Absolutely. And that goes to for all indie creators, honestly. Give it a proper shot. You might find something that might be your new favorite game. You never know, right? Just because it's not popular does not mean it's not good. And of course, donate. That should have been first. Donate a lot. Whenever you see fundraisers for folks in Gaza, do all you can. If you cannot give, I personally cannot, for example, on a shoestring budget, spread the word. Join a stream where you can push that forward. Offer prizes, something for rewards or something to help in a fundraiser. Anything you can do helps. And if you don't know enough, learn. You have the repository of all compiled human knowledge at your fingertips. Go for it. Just learn. You're gonna find that it's a very simple issue, actually, a very straightforward one that is not controversial at all if you really get into it. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And if you'd like to support Quasar at all, aside from playing it, if you enjoy 3D printing minis and such, I do have my store where I put up minis and terrain up there. And they're designed with a lot of love and a lot of engineering experience so that they're not just, good and easy to print, but also a lot of fun to play with. We got like collapsing catwalks and things that come apart and so on and so forth so that, in the game itself, it's more dynamic and yeah.
And Arcane, do you also have like a Ko-fi or a PayPal or anything like that if people want to just like support you? Because, if they're not playing with minis, is there another way we can get you funds so that you can keep making your art? Because that's really important.
Absolutely. There's a couple of ways. First of all, the HIO page for Quasar itself. Quasar is pay what you want. So you can absolutely just click, no thanks, take me to download, or you can donate straight through there. HIO is very nice in that it barely takes any commission, it goes straight to the artist. I do have a PayPal as well if folks prefer, but I usually prefer folks to get something out of that. So the main place you can do it is on my mini factory, where you can get all these minis and terrain from there from the sub. I also have a few other games on itch.io. There's Compact Kaiju, a little print and play a board game. It's kind of like a really introductory, you could say, war game where you play a little kaiju and move them around, and you can throw each other into buildings and stuff. And it's a little paper craft you build yourself. And then there's Rats in the Trenches, which is free, but the token pack for it is a way to support my game development as well. So yeah,
Okay.
thank
Amazing.
you so much.
Thank you. And where can we follow you online?
Mostly right now on Blue Sky at ArcaneWhiskers, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's my tag.
I think so.
But I am on Instagram as well, but I'm finding that platform to be increasingly awful and difficult
Yeah.
to get anything out of. So yeah, you can also join our Quasar Discord, especially if you want to play the game with us. We play on Tabletop Simulator often, and we're happy to teach you, happy to help you build characters. The community is really friendly, and they're just waiting for someone new to pull in and just make part of the team.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I'm curious if we have questions. I'd like to maybe have a follow-up talk at some point. I might make like a
Absolutely.
forum where people can submit questions based on our conversation, and then we can like do a little Q&A. Would you be down for that?
100%. That would be awesome.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I am taking so much away, and I know our listeners and viewers will too. This has been great. Free Palestine from the river to the sea, and
Free
I will see you all again
Palestine.
soon. Free Palestine.
Thank you so much for having me and for hosting all of this.